Hello, everyone. Can I ask you to take your seats, please? We're unusually late to start. Okay. Welcome, everybody. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1, 2, 4, and 5 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. And as I'm sure that many of you know, and if you don't, there's a comment sheet that's available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments or wanting to register to speak. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Confirmation of minutes from the April 12th planning meeting. Any changes? Carried? Carried. Okay, we have the first item up is the official plan and zoning floodplain mapping updates, phase 1. And it was deferred from the last planning meeting, and we have a couple of developers that are here today that want to speak, but may not have to speak. Marcel Deneme. Hi, Marcel. So I know that you've had conversations. I mean, this is late-breaking news. Councillor Vice Chair Tierney and I were actually right in this room until 8 o'clock last night, I think, and here we are back, and after that, he heard from you. So he has some direction, and you're comfortable with the direction? Do you still need to speak? Okay. Is anyone here from Richcraft as well? And Kevin, you know what's going on here too? Okay, so let's hear the direction on this item.
Right, Madam Chair, it's that staff be directed to come forward with the rezoning of the lands affected by the CARP restoration plan once the restoration work is constructed.
So, as you know, this item is before us because the province mandates that we do. The conservation authorities tell us what the floodplain is, and our job is the mapping of. And so, this case, we have outstanding the CARP restoration project. We don't have that information available to include in the map. What we're saying today is when that comes forward, Mr. Smith, we are going to, you're going to change the mapping at that point. We don't have, yes, Councillor Cloutier.
What's the timing on the direction to staff?
The direction to staff will be when the CARP restoration project is completed. And that, Mr. Smith?
So my understanding is the work is starting on the CARP restoration. I'm not sure what the timing for the completion, but once it is completed, the adjustments will be made to the floodplain mapping, and as Councillor Tierney has indicated in direction, we will at that time bring forward the report that would make that modification to reflect the new floodplain that would be established based on the implementation of the restoration plan. So as soon as that gets done, I'm not sure what the timing is for completion. Mr. Herwire might know.
Hang on a second. Okay, Councillor Wilkinson, do you want to speak on this item? We're holding it then. I'm holding this item. Thank you. No, it's okay, because now we're going to go to Mr. Herwire is going to speak then. Other people are going to want to ask questions. We're holding the item, unfortunately. Again, late-breaking news. Second one is the zoning bylaw amendment, part of 980 Earl Armstrong Road. We have two speakers. We have Mr. Kelly and Ms. Jarvis. There you are. Hang on a second. I think you're our only speakers. This is the zoning bylaw amendment for part of 980 Earl Armstrong Road, and we also have Councillor Kakish here, who is the councillor for Gloucester South Nepean. And we also have, the Vice Chair has in his hands a deferral motion. So I'm going to suggest that we have the deferral motion followed by the applicant, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Jarvis, speak to the deferral motion on why they don't want to have deferral. So let's get that on the floor. I know that Councillor Kakish has some comments as well.
Madam Chair, that the Planning Committee approve this item be deferred to the 10th of May Planning Committee meeting.
So that's to the 10th, deferral to the 10th of May is the deferral motion. So Mr. Kelly and Ms. Jarvis, come forward, please, and speak. And Councillor Kakish, are you both coming forward or just you? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, before we get to delegations, can we have an explanation why this is being deferred? That would set the table for context.
Then we'll hold, Mr. Kelly, we're going to have to hold this one too. So if you want to go back, I hope you have a seat to sit in. Thank you. Charge complaint, we're holding that one. 256 Reno Street and 211 Besserer Street. We're holding that. Number 5 is zoning bylaw amendment 199 to 209 Glen Park Drive and 2580 to 2608 Innes Road. Do we have any speakers? We have Deborah Belfi here. Does anyone on the committee have any questions? Ms. Belfi, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you still need to speak? Okay, thank you. So, committee, is it carried? Thank you. Okay, the next one we are holding, and it is the designation of Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have speakers. Next one, we have speakers. It's designation of the former Adath Jeshurun Synagogue, 375 King Edward Avenue, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The next one is the application for demolition and new construction at 16 Sweetland Avenue. This was before the Built Heritage Committee, and it's a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Sweetland Avenue Sweetland Avenue Heritage Conservation District. Does anyone want to have any questions on this, or can we carry this item? Carry? And number 9, was the application for new construction at 140 Howick Street. It's a property also designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and this one's located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Does anyone have any questions on this one? It was carried by Built Heritage Committee. Is it carried? Thank you. Number 10 is the application to alter the Hungarian Embassy at 306 Metcalf Street. Okay, it's a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Does anyone have any questions? No? Is it carried? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Number 11, application to alter the building at 302 Waverley Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. This is taking down the garage in the backyard and adding a 3-story addition. Carried? Carried. Number 12 is the Heritage Register procedures. Does anyone have any questions? Want to hold this one? No? Okay, so is it carried? Thank you. And number 13 is the planning. Is heritage permits issued through delegated authority in 2015? Anybody have any questions, or is this received? Thank you. Okay, then we have the motions of which notice has been previously given, which we'll deal with after our regular agenda. Okay, so we'll go back to the floodplain, and I think that Mr. Herwire was going to give us his, and just so you know, Mr. Herwire is still on this file, even though he's technically moved into a different area, because he is the one that knows the very soul of this project, I would say. And so even though he moved into another area, it benefited us greatly to have his expertise stay with it. So, Mr. Herwire?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the project started in January of this year. It's targeted for completion in 2018. And at that point, the new reach of the carp will be surveyed, which will confirm elevations, and that will input into a revised zoning post completion of the restoration project.
Thank you. So, Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question on that. Because the Carp River restoration being done in phases, and the part underway now from Richmond Side Road to the 417 is quite an identifiable piece. Is it possible to have if it's finished, because there are things ready to go in that area, to have that surveyed prior to it, or do you have to have the entire project completed?
Yes, it is possible. There are certain tests that would have to be met, but it is conceivable that it could be done in two phases, north of the 417, as you've indicated, and then south in the second phase.
Okay, so we'll wait. If something comes forward that needs that, then we could work with the Conservation Authority to get that done.
Yes, there is that possibility.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, Mr. Chair.
Good. So let's get back to where we were with the direction from Vice Chair Tierney. And we still have Marcel Deneme, and I don't think Kevin has left. But anyway, so as you know, I asked them both if they still needed to speak with this direction, and they said no. So the direction again is?
That staff be directed to come forward with a rezoning of the lands affected by the carp restoration plan once the restoration work is constructed.
Okay. Is that carried? Well, I don't need the direction carried, so the direction is direction, but on the item itself, the...
And Madam Chair, there's also a minor amendment as well.
Oh, yes, we have a technical amendment.
So the technical amendment, I'll just get therefore be resolved the document 1, proposed official plan amendment, be amended by deleting policy 3 in section 2, details, part B of the amendment, and replacing it with the following text. 3, the policies for the floodplains also apply where areas of the floodplains exist but are not mapped by the Conservation Authority, and therefore be identified as Schedule K and not the overlay of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. Applicants may be required to undertake the necessary studies as part of the development review and the approvals process to delineate the extent of which 1 in 100-year floodplains of these instances.
Anyone have any questions? So is the technical amendment carried? And the floodplain, the official plan and zoning floodplain mapping updates, is that carried as amended? Thank you. And with that direction. Okay, let's go on now to zoning bylaw amendment, part of 980 Earl Armstrong Road, and I'm going to I've already mentioned that Vice Chair Tierney is going to move a deferral, and I've mentioned that Ms. Jarvis and Mr. Kelly are in the audience and want to speak, but I'm going to go to the councillor for the ward to speak first on why this item should be deferred.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. As you probably know, the Riverside South Community Design Plan is in the process of being finalized. I'm pleased with some of the progress that we've made with the local developers in the area as well as city staff, but there's still some final touches that need to be completed. And as many of you know, Riverside South is one of the fastest growing communities, and there's a lot of potential there. So I want to ensure that we have that right balance of residential, commercial, employment, as well as natural and other features that I think are important, including recreational in that community. So the CDP is happening in June, is being finalized in the June Planning Committee, I believe. And so I think these two items are sort of in parallel, and I want to make sure that we have all our ducks lined up and we're comfortable proceeding forward once those items as part of the CDP review are finalized before we discuss the zoning of this site, which is also very close to one of the woodlots in the area as well. So that's the reason for it. Like I said, there have been talks, and I'm encouraged by some of the progress, but I think we're not there yet, and that's why I'm asking for deferral.
You want to ask a question now? Or can we bring forward...
No, it's a question directly related to what Councillor Cash just said. That makes a lot of sense to me. I just am reading from the report, which says the CDP will be considered by Planning Committee and then Council on the same agenda as this report, which clearly didn't happen in this meeting. But I just a question for Councillor Kakish. Would it make more sense to bring this item at the same meeting as the CDP is considered, as the report suggests, which would mean holding this until June?
I'm trying to find the balance, because I know for the applicant too, they're interested in moving forward. I think it does make sense to time it, but I think, we can, depending on the progress that happens between now and then, I think that is a reasonable compromise, but it's hard to say depending on how those discussions go in the next couple of weeks. Staff might have other comments as well, so I'd be interested in hearing what they might have to say on that.
Yeah, and also the report where you're reading that, if you remember, the CDP was supposed to come before us for Riverside South last month, and we determined that it wasn't ready yet, so that wording probably didn't change in the report that ties it together. But from my perspective, I don't see this tied to the CDP. There just is more work to be done to move forward to the next step. Mr. Moody, did you want to make any comment?
No, Madam Chair, I think the ward councillors identified the desires of the applicant to move forward on as timely a basis as possible, and as things continue to solidify with respect to the CDP, I think we will be achieving clarity. I think our goal right now is to achieve clarity, based on this deferral motion before this would come back to the meeting in May, and through that process, if things continue to progress, if there is clarity on where the CDP will be from a staff perspective, staff will be comfortable at that point in coming forward with the report.
Okay, thank you very much. Come on forward, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Jarvis. So as you hopefully heard, the deferral is only till the next Planning Committee meeting. And thank you, Ms. Jarvis, for all the work that you've labored on in the last few days. It's difficult when you're trying to pull different people together to get concurrence from more than one company and having, everybody in the same place at the same time. So really that's the reason we're taking this pregnant pause, if you will, and waiting till the next committee so we can make sure that we have that done. Go ahead.
No, we had indicated before that we're agreeable to the deferral to the next meeting.
You are?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks very much. That's good to hear. Thanks for coming out today, and continue on. I know that Mr. Moody has been working very hard with you on this file too, as well as certainly the councillor has been very involved. Thanks very much. So you've heard that, everyone. Is this item deferred until the first meeting in May? Carrie? Thanks, Councillor Kakish. The next item is the development charge complaint 173-175 Armstrong Street. And I didn't call you yet, Michael, but okay. Are you applying for a new position or something? You're taking a major decrease in pay? Coming forward, maybe be staff at the city?
No, it would be my pleasure to work with Mr. Mark.
Okay, so I know you actually have a good relationship. So, Mr. Mark, introduce it, and then we'll go to Mr. Polwin.
Yes. Madam Chair, Planning Committee and Council are vested with the authority to deal with complaints under the Development Charges Act, and this is the first such one to come to committee in this term. One came to a committee and council in the last term. It deals with 173 Armstrong and 175 Armstrong Road. There was a demolition of one building and the construction of 2 units on the property. The development charges bylaw provides that one can receive a credit for a demolition if it occurred within 10 years prior to the building permit being issued for the new construction. In the instance of this property, the demolition permit was issued on August 12, 2003. The demolition was complete on May the 28th, 2004, and the building permit was issued on September 18th, 2015. So whether one measures from when the demolition permit was issued or the demolition was complete, more than 10 years has expired, and it is the opinion of staff that simply by doing the arithmetic, more than 10 years has been exceeded, and therefore credit would not be applied for the one unit that is demolished. And therefore, the recommendation before you is that development charges be confirmed at $43,936.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Yes, Councillor Brockington?
Is this matter before the committee because the proponent has appealed a decision and there's an automatic process where it comes here?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it's mandatory that this committee deal with this matter?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else before Mr. Paulin speaks? Okay, over to you, Mr. Paulin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Secretary of the Committee, there is a slide deck. Thank you. No, my slide deck. Yes. Has it been distributed in paper?
I printed for my own purposes.
Okay.
It's in the shared drive, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Paulin, and I'm here pinch hitting for my colleague Roberto Alberto, who was to be here this morning until he threw his back out. This is a relatively unique situation and is not brought forward by a major developer, but by an individual seeking to build a legacy for his family. The issue really does come down to three matters. First, as you will see, there was a repeated change in assigned staff at the city, which engendered a number of delays, leading to the exceeding of the 10-year limit, perhaps. In addition, my client, Mr. Brea, who's with me here today and is available to answer questions that I might not be able to answer, was ill and hospitalized for some 4 months, again leading to additional delay. And then finally, there is some uncertainty within the development charge bylaw about how it is to be applied. Next deck, please, or next slide, please. I note, interestingly, that before I go on to this slide, that there is an assertion that 10 years has passed, but not really a justification contained in the report. Having said that, this slide simply sets out the legal basis for this and an answer to Councillor Brockington's question as to why this matter comes before committee. What the Act lays out is that if there is a concern about the application of the Act and the bylaw, it comes before Council, and only after that is there an ability to go to the Ontario Municipal Board if there's still a dispute. Next slide, please. Again, still setting it out. You have the ability, you have to hold a hearing, and then you can either dismiss the complaint or rectify any incorrect determination or error that was the subject of it. Next slide, please. So 173 to 175 Armstrong Street is owned by the Brea family, and Mr. Brea was intending on redeveloping it. The development charges required by the city were just short of $45,000. Next slide. So the demolition was completed on or about May the 28th, 2004. The properties were purchased in 2011. In 2013, Mr. Brea then contacted Ann O'Connor of the Planning Department. And then April, Mr. Brea then received correspondence from a second member of the Planning Department and then met with her on June 3rd, 2013. I'm sorry, I don't have that name. By the end of July, Mr. Brea is then referred back to Ms. O'Connor and was directed to apply for a severance. Next slide, please. Between October and December of that year, there were discussions with the building department, and the building department then indicated in December that the building permit should not be applied for. Now, the issue will become, in part, on the technical side, is what is development for the purposes of the bylaw. But at this point, certainly planning staff and the building department was aware that development was occurring in a larger sense. It wasn't construction, but that's not the word that's used in the bylaw. It was development. In February of 2014, Mr. Brea is hospitalized for some 4 months. Then in June of 2014, there is yet a third city planner on the file, Mr. Shen. Next slide. Mr. Shen takes a different position and opposes the application for development. In the fall, Mr. Brea is hospitalized again. In March of 2015, Mr. Brea is granted the severance, and subsequently the building permit is issued in September. And the complaint was filed in November of 2015. Now, next slide. So what the bylaw provides is where residential development occurs on a site which involved within the immediately previous 10 years. The question is going to be, what is in fact development? The bylaw itself does not refer to the issuance of a building permit. What's happening here is that an old structure is being replaced with a new. Ultimately, development charges are about contributing to strain on city infrastructure. That's not happening here. There is no additional call on roads or utilities or other services funded by development charges on by this construction. So the question then becomes is, what is development? Development is defined as construction, erection, or placing of one or more buildings. Now, that has the effect of increasing the size or usability and includes redevelopment. Now, the question is, when does that begin? Does that begin when a shovel goes into the ground, or does that begin when, in fact, discussions about the development process, which we all know can take a while, actually begins? Next slide, please. Ultimately, discussions with city staff, which, as we've seen, were delayed both due to changes in staffing, differences in positions and the illnesses of my client began in 2013, so well within the 10-year period. This is not a situation, quite frankly, which runs a risk for the city. It's not going to happen time and again. There was an unfortunate coincidence of events here, and this is an individual, not a development company. He needs some help from his city, and I would ask that this committee consider giving him that help. And I'm available for any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. And I just wanted to point out, as you can tell, I've given, not Mr. Mark, Mr. Paulin, I've given you longer than the usual 5 minutes because the 5-minute rule always applies, except in this case, I was giving you more flexibility due to the judicial nature of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I thought it was important because it's, I think the timeline is important. So who has any questions? For Mr. Mark, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Paulin? But you might as well stay there because it could turn around in a heartbeat. So, Councillor Hughley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mark, if you could let us know, like Mr. Paolin's presentation, he talks about the potential delays due to change of staff. Now, we know in the city files can change ownerships, but there's not necessarily delays because of that. In your review, was there any signs that things were delayed because of the change of staff?
Madam Chair, when I look at the file, what I find instructive is that the matter only went to committee, to the Committee of Adjustment, on July the 2nd, 2014. Which was already outside the 10-year period. They needed a severance in order to obtain the building permits for development, and so it's not necessarily so that the delay to staff would even justify the success of the complaint, but even if it were a factor, it would be my opinion that given it only went to committee outside the 10-year period, it was not a factor in this case.
It looks to me like we're talking about delays by changing over staff, but there was also a big factor here, I think, is the change of ownership. Under the previous owner, no applications, no plans for development at all. Is that correct? For the first 8 years?
That is the information received from Mr. Paul, and I don't have that information myself.
Okay, because to me, Madam Chair, 10 years sounds like an awful long time to figure out what you're going to do with a piece of property. The fact that they change ownership in there, there's nothing, I don't see anything in the bylaw here that says we'll extend it further if there's a new owner or anything. So thank you, Mr. Mark, for your comments. I won't be supporting this.
Yeah. And you were just saying it was outside the 10 years, but it was outside the 10 years by a month and a half or something like that from these details. But
at the time of the Committee of Adjustment hearing, that's correct, Madam Chair.
Right. So I wanted to ask Straim Shen why you changed the staff opinion on that. Because that's identified in the report here that...
Madam Chair, the staff concern has been expressed from the beginning by the initial staff members, and I do have the email correspondence. The initial staff comments from Ms. O'Connor was requesting adjournment so more information can be sought in order to formalize a more well-rounded opinion of the file. As a result, once the information came in and I was assigned as a third planner, my response to the applicant from the beginning was there was concern due to the lot size.
Concern due to what?
Due to the lot size. It was a very small size of lots.
Oh, small size of the lot for what he was planning to build.
Correct.
And that's before infill 1 or 2. Right?
Right now, infill 1 is in play, so it's concurrent while the application is going on.
Okay. Anyone else have, Councillor Brockington? Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Yes, Councillor Lieber.
So I think I would just ask Mr. Paulin to weigh in.
Well, I'm hearing two different things. One was concern was expressed, and it took a while to get more information, versus your assertion that the messages that were being received were different from one planner to the next. Is it your assertion that the applicant could have made these timelines had they not received different messages? And can you just provide me some clarification as to what was different there?
As I said, I'm not here to place all of the blame on city staff. This was a coincidence of illnesses of Mr. Brea, and the fact that, and forgive me, I saw this file for the first time this morning at 8:30. But I am advised by my colleague, Mr. Roberto, that what happened in 2014 was that when Mr. Shen took over responsibility within the planning department, that he reversed the position previously taken. I have no reason to dispute what he has just said. That is the information that I have. But I do want to share this with the committee. In the law of legal nonconforming uses, which does not apply here, but I just want to sort of address a philosophy, what the courts have always said is we look at the reason that things were delayed, and we look at whether people were actually making reasonable efforts to get this developed. And I will grant the concern of Councillor Hubley that the initial destruction took place long before my client owned the property. But my client bought the property in 2011 and immediately began moving toward the redevelopment of the property in a manner that would not put additional strain on the city's infrastructure. And he continued to do that, and two things interfered. First was extended illness and hospitalization, and the other was changes of ownership of the file within the planning department. And I acknowledge that those things happen. But where the courts have looked at legal nonconforming use, they've said in circumstances like that, we are going to grant that this use is continued because this person really tried to get this done. And this individual really did try to get this done and tried to do it within the timelines. And I think at the end of the day, the thing that needs to be borne in mind is that what is almost complete now on the property does not put additional strain on the infrastructure of the city, which is what development charges are there to pay for. And so I guess what I'm asking this committee is to say, you know what, this is a one-off. There's no additional strain on the city's infrastructure. We don't really need the money to pay for anything, regardless of whether we may have a technical ability to ask that it be paid. That's really what this is about. This isn't about needing new roads or new rapid transit or new water pipes to service what is being built on this property, because that was all paid for before. And that's what I'm asking this committee to consider, is the intersection of unfortunate timing, real effort, and the fact that the city doesn't need the money for this.
Thank you, Mr. Pollin.
And further to that, I was going to ask Mr. Mark what your comments would be on what that kind of interpretation vis-a-vis this lot would mean to the development charge, the larger development charge itself.
Madam Chair, the proposition that Mr. Pollin put forward is one that is heard from time to time. Each additional unit, I would respectfully submit, does put demand on additional services. And so there, granted it's modest, but each additional unit puts a demand on the facilities at the Pickard Center. the facilities of Britannia or Lemure. It is the incremental change from each unit. That is the basis of the development charges bylaw. Ontario Municipal Board jurisprudence does allow municipalities to put a time limit on credits for demolition. And so this council has adopted a policy in the bylaw of a credit for 10 years, which I note changes to only 5 years looking back in 2019. And so my comment would be, Madam Chair, that the charging of units in an infill situation is well-founded and justified in the bylaw.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Leeper? Anything else, Councillor Leeper, before I go to Councillor Blais? You want to want wrap-up after, Councillor Blais?
Thanks very much. So what is the incremental increase in unit count?
It is 2 new units, 1 demolition for a net increase of 1, but 2 units were charged for because 10 years had passed since the demolition.
Okay, so if we were to accept Mr. Paulowin's argument or some other argument that says that we should change it, the 44 would become 22 effectively?
I don't know if it's a 1-apartment, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom split, but it would be a credit of 1 unit, Madam Chair.
Okay. And if we do not accept the recommendation of staff, what then must follow?
If you were inclined to accept Mr. Paulowin's submission, then committee would have to adopt a recommendation saying that a credit for 1 unit is to be applied.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Do you intend to do that?
I intend to vote against the recommendation. So I guess we'll see what the outcome of that vote is.
Okay. So anyone else? So we'll go back to Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Chair. And I would encourage my colleagues to vote against the staff recommendation. I would look forward to a motion that seeks to apply the credit to just the 1 unit. The extenuating circumstances here are such that I think we have some wiggle room. I've heard from Mr. Paulowin that there is that room within the law. I don't think we're going to be creating a lot of precedents. This is a small builder. Tens of thousands of dollars for this project, which has been supported by the community, which is an improvement in our community versus what was there, is important. I would ask my colleagues to reject that staff recommendation and take into account those extenuating circumstances in this instance.
Fortunately, Councillor Leeper, other people do want to speak. I was looking, nobody was talking, but thank you. Okay, so you listen, and if you want to come back, I'll certainly allow you to. Councillor Nussbaum, Councillor Chiarelli, then Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I don't, in reading the Development Charge Bylaw, Section 9.1, which is particularly clear on this issue, along with the definition of development, which was provided in the report, I frankly don't see how Council can now or would consider arguing against its own bylaws, which strike me as being crystal clear in this case. So I'm a little bit puzzled as to what the legal basis would be of ignoring Section 9, subsection 1, given the clarity of the language and given that the definitions as described in the report clearly mean that in this case the applicant did not initiate a development within the 10-year period as defined in the bylaw. So for that reason, I actually think we have, well, in my case, I plan on voting in favor of the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chiarelli, and then Councillor Brockington and Councillor Blais.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would normally agree with Councillor Nussbaum, but while our bylaw may say X, Y, and Z, we sit here, the purpose of us hearing these applications is to hear them on their merits individually. There's no precedent governing us. There is no stare decisis governing us. We are here to apply our discretion and exercise our discretion on the basis of an individual case on a case-by-case basis. So what we do here today is not going to bind us to what we do even on the next item that comes before us on this issue. So I also agree with Councillor Leeper on the extenuating circumstances aspect to this, and I think the remedy is actually going to be one unit if we go that way, but to this point, I just want to make sure that people realize that if all you did was apply or paste down a number of bylaws and regulations, there would be no reason for us to be sitting here. We are here as the group that exercises discretion on individual cases on a case-by-case basis on this type of issue.
Thank you. Councillor, did you have any comment on that, Mr. Mark, or just going to let it go?
I would have nothing to add at this point, Madam Chair.
Councillor Brockington and Councillor Blais. And anybody else? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Madam Chair, if I was planning to go around the world on a trip, I wouldn't apply for my passport the day before my trip. I would take the necessary precautions to prepare to make sure that when my deadline or when my voyage began, I had all my necessary paperwork and inoculations and documents in hand. And this is an example of where the clock was ticking on that 10-year timeline and the proponent missed the boat, so to speak. And we've heard from our own legal counsel that he does not believe the city is at fault for these delays. It's very, very similar to a case in my ward where a developer had to pay added development fees because we have amended the bylaw regarding the DCs. Then he claimed that a combination of staff and my predecessor slowed down that application. That ultimately cost him $65,000. But at the end of the day, they had to pay. And so I do agree with Councillor Shirley that we take matters on a case-by-case basis, but I'm not swayed that the city is at fault here. I do believe that there could have been additional planning in advance to make that deadline, and that's not the case, and I'm not willing to give this proponent a break on the development charges.
Thank you. So, Councillor Blais.
Yeah, sorry. One question, Mr. Mark. When did the 10-year moratorium come into effect?
That was enacted in 2009. There was some transition for some development underway, but that was enacted in 2009 bylaw, Madam Chair.
Okay, so should the 10 years not have started in 2009 when the bylaw was enacted?
Madam Chair, Council turned its mind to the issue at the time and provided for a transition period for building permits issued by a particular date. I don't have that date memorized, but it was certainly before September the 18th, 2015.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? No? So, would you like to have yeas and nays on this then? Okay. So on the item before us, which is development charge complaint 175 Armstrong Street. On the report. Councillor Blais?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli?
No.
Councillor Cloutier?
No.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
No.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Yes.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Yes.
And myself, yes. 6-4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to ask Mr. Mark. So this item will go to council,
Yes, Madam Chair.
and is this item appealable?
Yes, it is, Madam Chair.
Okay, so can I ask one other question? The information that was mentioned by, I think, you were asked the question on previous correspondence on that supported the staff opinion remaining constant. So maybe not for you, but for Stream Shen. Stream, are you still here?
I know the emails you're referring to, Madam Chair, that Mr. Stream,
Yeah.
Mr. Chen referred to.
I thought it would be helpful if we had the concurrence that he didn't change the opinion to.
We'll provide that documentation.
I don't think that it colors anything, but it might have some impact. Thank you very much, everybody. Our next item is the zoning bylaw amendment, 256 Rideau Street and 211 Bezero Street, and we have one speaker, Mr. Fernie from Foten. Okay, hang on a minute. Does anyone on committee have any questions? So you have questions of staff? All right, so Janet Bradley's here also to speak, so Mr. Fernie, I'm not going to be asking you the question I was going to ask you. Okay, so just sit down, and we're not having a presentation, so go ahead, Councillor Nussbaum.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question is one similar to questions I've asked on previous applications on Rideau Street, and it has to do with step-backs. The Central Area Secondary Plan mentions that where development reaches medium to high profiles above the street, it shall generally be set back. The official plan has guidelines for main streets which talk about the fact that above 6 stories buildings should be set back. Clearly, if you look along Rideau Street, that approach has not always been applied, but that was before I sat on Planning Committee, and so given that this is an issue that I think is important, you talk in the secondary plan about a traditional shopping street, about wanting it to be human scale, and so on. My question is a very simple one. Why, in this case, was there not an effort made by staff or an insistence by staff before this went to the OMB to have the applicant step back the building on Rideau Street?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, I guess a little bit of thinking about the history, although we have policies within the city's official plan, and the Councillor, Madam Chair, is correct with respect to step-backs and transition and how to obtain transition in buildings to make them more compatible. You have to look at the zoning in certain instances, and such as on the subject property. And there's a history, too, as well of previous approvals for a building on the site, but the zoning on this site you can actually probably trace back to the times of Z2K when there was no requirement for front yard, rear yard, and when you had no windows on your side yard, you could go to 0, and that was transferred over into the bylaw 1998 and then into 2008. So there is a zoning potential or a zoning envelope that's on that property, Madam Chair, that allows the property owner, despite the policies that you might find, to go to the basically the lot lines in all 4 cases. Now this is the MD zoning, and there's height limits that were established. The FSI was removed when Z2K days and put a height limit on the property. And basically, so it's about 26, 27 stories with 0 lot lines. But being the MD zoning, I know it's been identified from staff, and perhaps if you could question Mr. Smith on the timing, I know there's a study to be done that would better implement the policies that you would find on main streets and in the downtown area in order to obtain that transition the Councillor was talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Mizzi has something to say on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as Mr. James has mentioned, Councillor Nussbaum, in fact, it was this file, this application, a year or so ago that drove the thinking that resulted in the department bringing forward on the work plan exercise that we had last summer. The department's work plan was adopted at the July meeting of the Planning Committee, and in that work plan is to do a number of studies that resulted from concerns raised by this particular project. One was the R4 study, and one was the MD zoning study, because as Mr. James said, the MD zoning essentially is a height limit, but a box lot line to lot line, and that greatly concerned us, and this project is a manifestation of that existing zoning. So we fully intend in this term of council to finish a study of the MD zone so that we can incorporate appropriate setbacks at the right heights.
Madam Chair, that's good news, but in light of the great public and private investment on Dorito Street over the last number of years and continuing until today, I would certainly encourage that sort of work item to come sooner in the term of council than later, before we arrive at a place where we have a wind tunnel through a street that, again, we've invested a lot in and has a real potential to be a fantastic people-oriented place. So I'm encouraged to hear that this is going to be addressed, but would hope that staff could bring this item up soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, so I'm going to ask, so Mr. Fernie, if you would come forward, please, followed by Ms. Bradley. Hi, Janet.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Carl Fernie with FO10 Planning. We do not have a presentation.
Just here for questions? Okay.
Any question?
And asking for support. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Fernie? Oh, guess who? Councillor Nussbaum.
In light of what you just heard about good planning principles needing to adopt step backs, particularly on streets such as Rideau, and hearing about staff's initiative, does your client have any interest in considering a way in which a step back could be incorporated on Rideau Street in order to ensure that the experience on the street is not one where a pedestrian is looking up at a looming 26-story building, but where you're hiding your height appropriately as one does through step backs?
Thank you. We are still working through the site plan process and through the design. I know DCR Phoenix did have an approved site plan in December 2014 that went through. Again, we're still in that technical comment section, so we would take it under advisement and work with staff on that.
Good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fernie. Ms. Bradley?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee. I'm speaking today very briefly on behalf of Claridge Homes. Claridge Homes, you may know, have built two of the high-rise buildings to the immediate west of this project. They're called Plaza 3 and Plaza 4, and Claridge contributed, or at least assumed its responsibility to provide the parking for the occupants of that building and for the visitor parking. Claridge also owns a building across the street. So the facts in this case are actually, I thought, just reading it, quite incredible. This building is these two buildings, so two 26-story buildings, 275 units, and the proposal that's before you is that there will not be a single parking space for any of those occupants. The 275 units, there won't be a single parking space for any of them. Your bylaw would have required 146. What you are providing is 12 of the, what the owner is providing is 12 or 14 of the 26 visitor parking. So a project which would have 164 parking spaces is going to have 14. It's an incredibly drastic reduction in parking. And all of that is in an area, downtown Rideau, and if you look at the comments from downtown Rideau and from Action Sandy Hill, they note two things. First of all, in that area, a lot of loss of off-street parking. All of the public parking lots, or at least a lot of them, are being used for development these days. A good thing, but what it means is less off-street parking, and also what you find is less parking on the streets. You can't find a place to park on the street. You can't find a place to park off the street. Parking has become a problem, and when you have a problem with parking, you then have a problem with traffic congestion. So why is such a drastic proposal being made in this particular case? It's based on two premises. The first premises is that there will only be students in this property, and students do not have cars. That's premise number one. And premise number two is that this building will always be used just by students. Forever and a day, it will be used only by students. And our submission is that both of those premises are faulty. First of all, students who usually, or at least a good part of them, not usually, that's a wrong word, but students often do have cars. That's premises number one. They actually do have cars. And the second premise is this building is zoned and planned as an apartment building. Textbook or students, whatever the name of the company is, their business plan as of 2016 may be that we will only market tenancies to students. But tomorrow they could change their business plan, or tomorrow they could sell it to Company X, and Company X could have standard residential units for the general public. So premise one and premise two cannot be supported. And your whole zoning bylaw is set up on the premise that when you have this type of units, or when you have residential units in a community, there's an obligation on the owner and developer to provide their share of the burden of what that's going to do to the parking in the community and to the streets. And I think because it's zoned and planned as an apartment building, you're setting also a precedent. I don't see why next developers won't come in and seek this kind of drastic reduction as well, and you'll have a sort of snowball effect on parking, and as I say, I think parking leads to traffic congestion. So in summary, Claridge has concerns about the impact of this proposal. You've got written concerns from downtown Rideau and written concerns from ASH, the Community Association, about the impact. I don't think the impact was adequately considered by your planning staff, and it's Claridge's position that it will have an impact, and it's not good planning. So thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you. Question, it's a question of Ms. Bradley, Councillor Chiarelli, and then Councillor Hughley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just went through public consultation in my ward about the potential removal of minimum parking requirements, where we were assured this thing would never happen anywhere in the city. But my first question dealt with the issue of students, because we have them in College Ward. That's why we're called College Ward. I'm wondering what you think the incidence is of students with vehicles.
I don't have the statistics on that. This is not a residence. It's not zoned institutional. That may mean that presumably you're looking at students in second year, third year, graduate students, could be a whole array of students. And the student population has access to cars these days. I don't have the statistics, however.
All right. Okay, good enough. Thanks.
Councillor Hughley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering with your comments, the builder or the developer here is not marketing or planning to market this building to all students. It's only to those without cars. Like, they're being very clear up front that there'll be no parking in this building. We're not asking for a building that will house every student. We know there's a huge issue with shortage of space, affordable space for students in this area. The university has grown without considering housing for their students, so we have to do something. So I actually like this proposal. Your red flag that one day it could be converted to apartments should be a reason that we demand parking in there now. Doesn't impact me the same way as it seems to be impacting you. I'm thinking if down the road this gets converted to apartments, then they will market it to people that don't have cars and will want to use the LRT system that will be within walking distance of this building. So quite frankly, I like it. I think we need to do more of this to get our students proper housing so they can focus on their education and not their shelter. So I'll be supporting this, Madam Chair.
I don't know whether I could respond to that, but I think we all agree, everybody in this community agrees, that we need to have the transit improved, and of course a huge effort is being made in that regard, and in this area people will walk. But the point is and that will have a significant reduction on people with cars, and that's why in this area you don't have to provide a lot of parking. For 275 units, you only have to provide 146. So there's already built into the zoning a recognition that a lot of people will walk and take transit in this particular area. But the fact is, and you're right, there won't be parking there, and so when I or someone else chooses to live there, I do so with that recognition. But I think the problem is people do have cars. If you don't have a place to park, you try to find somewhere else to park. And so what that means, people cruise around looking for off-site parking. It contributes to parking on residential streets. It leads to illegal parking. It leads to double parking. It leads to a cruising around effect. And the more you take away off-street parking and provide for cars as something to be planned for, the impact increases.
And but the idea here is that you're not going to market this to people that have cars. So I don't see where this is going to create the issue where they're going to be driving around looking for spots. If anything, in the bare bones inventory that's available now to students, I would think there's probably students taking up rental places that have parking that don't need it. So they could actually move into this place and then create a place for someone looking to park. But that's not the issue that this development's trying to deal with. This is trying to provide a product to the students, however many there is out there that don't have cars. So I'm sorry, I'm not catching your argument, and usually I agree with everything you say before this committee. So I'm wondering if it's me that's missing something here or what's going on. So thank you for trying to answer that.
Thank you, Councillor Hubert. Just before we go to Councillor Blais and then back to Councillor Shirelli, Ms. Bradley, you know that on the area west of the canal already, they have the right already to build with no parking. There's no parking. And this is, you know, just to add on to what Councillor Hubert was saying, this is less than 400 meters from our #1 investment in stage 1, also stage 1 of our LRT. If you're not going to do it here, where are you going to do it? Councillor Blais?
Thanks. So I'm presuming that one of the rationales behind this, in addition to promoting transit, is to help the builder reduce the cost of construction so that rents are more affordable for students? No, I guess I'm looking for an answer. That's one of the rationales.
Yes, Madam Chair, a mechanical parking system underground would have to be constructed to meet the required parking, which would be very costly and, of course, would make it cost prohibitive for student housing.
So I think it's a very noble thing to do, and I agree we should be doing that in addition to the reasons relating to access to public transit. I guess my question is, how do we ensure that that happens, though?
As has been alluded to, Madam Chair, by Councillor Hubley, there will also be conditions in the site plan approval alerting all residents and future residents.
No, sorry, I'm less concerned about alerting them to the fact that there's no parking. How do we ensure that they do then, in fact, offer a lower price to students because cost of construction was lower? That is the question.
Madam Chair, we can't dictate the rents offered. The market will dictate that, as I assume you are aware. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the concern, right? If one of the rationales is that this will allow them to offer lower rents to students, which I think we all agree they probably need, we actually have no control over that ability. And so I think it's just one of the concerns, or one of the issues you have to be aware of walking in, relating to the conversion things that Ms. Bradley was talking about later, is that we can't guarantee that they will actually transfer the savings back to their tenants. And to say that they will by default, I think, is ignoring the history of any number of developers in our community.
Sure, I agree, but that's not before us today. And you know, I mean, but again, as I said, anyway, I'm not going to, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but as, you know, it's just like somebody will say to me, you know, why don't we have a Westin in Barrhaven? You know, why aren't you working to get a Westin in Barrhaven? Well, you know, sure. I mean, it is what the market bears. Everybody has marketing policies and that, and this will be available. And I would think if we don't have the right to determine that that's what the, who moves into these places. That is a concern. Where am I going? Oh, back to Councillor Chiarelli. Does anybody else, before Councillor Chiarelli speaks, does anyone else want to chime in here because he's already spoken once? I will. Okay. Councillor Cloutier?
Just to frame it, I like the crystal clarity of the product that this building offers. I like that. I think it's better that it's a 0 or a 1 as opposed to a, as you've said, a little bit more parking, because the people that will be attracted by this product will be forewarned. To be forewarned is forearmed, and I don't believe that they'll be trolling around Cumberland and George Street looking for parking, because they will know, or if it is a person that has made arrangement, then they will have rented a parking spot behind the Little Theatre or something like that. So from that point of view, from the marketing point of view, I think it is a product, and as a city investing $3 billion and another several billion in Phase 2 with the LRT and all the products and services that are in the area, I think it does have a place. The product does have a place in the community for students, and on that basis, I'd be supporting it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are you asking a question here? And then we're going back to Hubling.
I wanted to move into comments, if I can.
You have a question, Councillor Hubling?
A very quick point to add to the discussion. Councillor Blade just confirmed
okay, that's
that
a comment, so we'll start with Councillor Chiarelli.
Okay, the difficulty I have with this are a few of them. One is that I just came out of consultations in my ward run by our staff about the very same issue, about removing the requirement for minimum parking in the area. And to my residents, it was a pretty full house, my community was promised that this kind of thing would never happen, okay? Because developers would always insist on putting in some parking even though they weren't required to. So don't worry, Centrepoint community, this will never happen anywhere. Go forward 2 weeks, it's happening now, okay? So I think the staff who made those representations to my community needs to plug in to what's actually on the agenda coming up. Secondly, we have in my own ward, where we have lots of students in this same situation, we have Monterey Drive, which was constructed in the 70s with fewer parking spots than would be required by the parking bylaw of the day in Nepean, which was pretty generous, down to, I think, half a spot per unit. And everybody who moves in there, and a lot of them are students, know that they do not have a parking spot.
Yeah.
But they move in and they have vehicles.
When Baseline has LRT.
And you know what? We don't care about whether we're punishing them. It's the neighborhood streets we're concerned with. And they go driving around every night. They park on neighborhood streets. Yes, they're only allowed to be there 3 hours, so all the neighbors have to come out and time how long the car is there, call the parking people. You have all our bylaw officers out there constantly ticketing people, and you have a constant problem that everybody complains about, but we assure people will never happen, okay? So this company moves in, they build their project, and what happens 6 months from then if they go bankrupt, they leave the project, they sell it to someone else? Then we're left with people saying, hey, they've put in some small boutique condos with no parking. And all these people, yes, they're warned in their stack of documents, which will be this thick. In one of those papers, it says you have no parking spot. Yes, they're warned they have no parking spot, but guess what? They move in, they have a car. Each one is filled with eternal optimism that they're going to be the one that finds the parking spot every night. And they're driving around, and you end up with Monterey happening again. So we can pretend that this will never happen, but if we're helping it happen, and we have all kinds of precedent and experience showing us that it does happen, then we can't claim ignorance. Okay? I think we need to do one of two things. Either come out and say, yes, we're going to be building things with no parking at all, and yes, there are going to be problems spilling over onto neighborhood streets, and just admit that to people. But in any case, don't come out to my ward, to a theater full of people, and tell them there's nothing to worry about because this kind of project will never happen. So, of course, I'm not going to support it.
Okay, is it you, Councillor Hubley? And is that every... Okay. Does anyone have a question of Ms. Bradley?
No.
Just the staff. So, Ms. Bradley, you can go and sit down. Although I may be asking you to come back, because who knows? Hubley, who's...
Thank you.
Steve, are you back on the list?
I have no questions. I may say something.
Who has questions? You? You have questions. Do you have questions? You want to make a statement?
I've got a question to what Councillor Chiarelli just said.
Okay, question it. And then one of either Mr. Herwire or Mr. James will do their best to answer it.
Yeah. I'd just like to get clarification of who made the commitment in College Ward that they would never do a project like this across the city. Whose commitment are we supposed to be honoring here? You said somebody came into your ward and made that promise. Who was it?
Well, you should talk to city staff, because...
And maybe we leave it at that right now. Okay, you can have a conversation with Ms. Sneddon after. All right?
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out if we do have a commitment here that we're supposed to be honoring, that's all. So my comment to this was, as Councillor Blake confirmed, before anybody's moving into this building, Phase 1 of the LRT will be running, so our piece of this puzzle will be in place, and Councillor Blake puts his reputation to it.
That's right, and in Phase 2 we'll be at Baseline Station, right?
Yeah, but it's not... Baseline is not Phase 1, so I can see Councillor Chiarelli's concerns for his
Question
ward.
from Councillor Brockington, please.
Madam Chair.
Okay, so just to let you know, on the next item, we've got very patient people that are waiting here, 8 speakers that are here to speak to us on Withrow. So I know we're having, somewhat of a good time now. But I think we could save it for all the excellent media folks that are here for after. So questions, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I be reminded, has City Council approved projects this term of council for new builds without a requirement for parking? Have we already dealt with other matters in the past where... So I just want that confirmed, and then I have some follow-ups.
To the area west of the canal? This is the area east of the canal. The area west of the canal has that right now, that we have approved that policy.
Madam Chair, I can think of a very similar project that would have been before committee early 2015 on Mann Avenue. It was the conversion of the former church, where there was a total of, I believe, 8 parking spaces provided, primarily visitor-oriented, again, student-oriented housing project.
But have there been projects of the size that we have before us this morning? I thought we were dealing with something near the downtown library-ish, maybe south of there, where we're looking at towers within the last 6 months. I could be wrong, but...
Are you talking about on Metcalf with the Heritage Building there? It has a couple of towers to it?
I'm trying to determine whether or not this is the first time something of this magnitude has been considered, or whether we have a precedent where we've talked about other builds.
Well, we do have a policy, and it's on page... We have a page 10 that's the site is located in area east of the canal, but area west of the canal, dwelling units in both high-rise buildings and mixed-use buildings are exempt from parking altogether. So it's not precedent-setting. Council has a policy that says that on the other side of the canal.
Okay.
And when was that? When did we approve that? Anybody have that information, Mr. Smith?
Madam Chair, that would have been in place for quite a number of years. And the other thing I would add is around the TOD areas, the ones that were approved and established with the TOD plans, there's also a no parking requirement. You can provide it, but you don't have to provide it.
Yeah.
So there's two things I just want to talk about very briefly. One is when this gets built, the fact that this building will not have parking, I think that's sort of a buyer beware type of issue where the owner makes it well known what amenities are in the building. If there's no parking, then you take that at your own risk. And then you have to, if you have a vehicle, look for appropriate storage for that vehicle. But the other thing that I think is quite germane to this discussion is what Councillor Shirelli talked about, and that is what is the impact on the neighboring community. Because I think we just can't think about or focus our thoughts on if this is going to be an immediate accommodation for students, that could change at some point. And I think we have to think about what the impact will be, not just today on the community, but the potential going forward in the future. If the demographic changes and more people move and have cars, then there is an impact there. So again, what is the responsibility of a city council when it's considering these types of requests for a parking provision? And so I think going down to just visitor parking is inadequate, but I don't know what that balance is, because you have quite a number, 164, originally proposed down to nothing for residents and only 14 for visitors. We just know, or at least my gut, Madam Chair, is there will be a requirement for parking. And so do we force this development now to have X number of spots? And that's something to think about that we need to discuss. So I have no issue approving buildings with reduced parking, because I do think in the urban core we want to encourage folks not to own a vehicle, to rely on public transit and other modes. So that's just concerns I have now at this point, but certainly there's no dispute that post-secondary housing, there's a significant need across the city. And there was a 3-building proposal on Brookfield Road in my ward last year for post-secondary students, and they were providing ample parking at that location. And we were 600 meters from the Confederation transit line. So just some thoughts, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't even know, who else still wants to talk here? Question or comment? Then make them now. Since no one else is putting their hand up, I think it's you.
No, just to say, although I was critical earlier about the lack of step back, I think I would defend in this case the idea of not having parking. I think it makes sense. And important to note, we talked about planning principles, and the speaker who was here hypothesized or felt that we were not following good planning principles. I think it's important to note on the frontage on Besser, in this case, has been dramatically improved, and you now have frosted windows and great access from Besser Street. If you continue walking west to the very buildings that the previous speaker was speaking of, you're faced with a very high blank wall, which actually gives pedestrians or neighbors nothing to look at. So in terms of planning principles, I think we're doing a much better job on this than unfortunately we did on buildings further west on Rideau Street. So for that reason and for the reasons Councillor Hubley articulated, I'll be supporting the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Blais, and then that's it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at the drawing that is provided in the report on what page is that? Page 16 on our system here. Where exactly are the 14 visitor parking spots?
Madam Chair, the parking is for the visitors is being provided above ground. You would come in off of Besser and you would go up into the upper levels of the podium before the towers start.
Oh, so it's like a garage built into the podium?
Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair. It's second floor.
Okay, that's it. I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So on this, I think we've had enough debate. We should have yeas and nays on it. Okay. Councillor Blais? Oh, sorry, but let me introduce it again because it's been a while. So this is zoning bylaw amendment for 256 Rideau Street and 211 Besserer Street. Councillor Blais.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Schwelle?
No.
Councillor Cloutier?
Yes.
Councillor Hughley?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Yes.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Yes.
And myself, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 to 1. Thank you, everybody. Now we are going to go on to our next held item, and also item, just so you all know, item 7 has speakers as well. So while Ms. Collins comes forward, she's our heritage planner on this 21 Withrow, which is a designation of Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and this is a recommendation that came out of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, amended. The Planning Committee recommend that Council issue a notice of intention. Followed by the next held item, just for your information, is the designation of the former synagogue at 375 King Edward Avenue. We also have several speakers on that, so just for your information. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Collins and Mr. Herwire. Does anybody have any questions before we go to public delegations on the designation of Kilmorey, which is on 21 Withrow Avenue? No? We're good? Mm-hmm. And okay, so first speaker is Joan Clark. Joan, are you still here? Hi. You're the president of City View Community Association. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Joan Clark, and I'm president of the City View Community Association. Today, I am representing the people in City View community. Our slogan is, a little bit of country in the city. City View is an area that had many of their homes built for our veterans returning from serving our country after World War II. Some of these original owners still live here. We also now have many young families moving in. Some of these are returning to the community where they were brought up. We received word last summer that Dr. Roger passed away. The people in the community wondered what would happen to that property, a landmark in our community. We were hoping that the family would work with the community to save the house. That did not happen. We became very worried when we saw the real estate ad announcing to developers that there could be 14 lots for redevelopment. There was no mention of the house except for the specifications. There was no picture of the house. There was no sale of the house, only the redevelopment plans. The plans that would demolish the heritage home and build 14 new homes. That is what is advertised. We were concerned once more that when Dave Roger began destroying the wall that was built originally around the house. This destruction occurred just days before the meeting at the Heritage Committee and continued as of this past weekend. The destruction of the outer wall that was a landmark entrance to this property. Many residents have contacted the association. All were concerned about the loss of this historical estate. Here are some comments. The preservation of 21 Withrow is important to me and my family. I know that Nepean was an important town in the Ottawa Valley prior to Confederation and well before the establishment of Bytown, Ottawa as the capital. Another, as a scientist, I welcome many foreign students into our community. They teach me a lot about their cultural heritage. I'd like to teach them that we too have an historical and agricultural heritage that is not defined by the tacky McMansions popping up all over. Please let us keep this building and enough of the trees and gardens to let it stand as a beautiful, functional, and educational reminder of past days. Another, I live in City View. It's hard to believe that such a prominent and notable poet, William Wilford Campbell, once lived here right in my own neighborhood. I learned his poems in school and would love to see his family home, Kilmorey, be given heritage designation in his honor. I hope the grounds he wrote so passionately about and enjoyed will also be preserved in this designation for future generations. Another, the fine stone house identified as 21 Withrow is a symbol of the history of our capital. It reflects the hopes and dreams of a generation that committed to create the country we now have and so often take for granted. A nation that is not prepared to preserve its traditions and touchstones is doomed to fade away. Another, this building reflects more than just its architectural form. It represents the efforts of many, some humble and others of higher calling, brought together by a project, in this case, to build a fine residence for a family. Another, the Kilmorey House was built in 1840 for the Scott family. In the early 1900s, it became home to William Wilford Campbell, a renowned Canadian poet and writer, and one of the Confederation poets. I remember this particular poem that I studied in school, called Indian Summer. Along the line of smoky hills, the crimson forest stands, and all the day the blue jay calls throughout the autumn lands. It is hard to believe that this poet lived around the corner to my house.
Ms. Clark, you're going to have to wrap up. You're almost out of time.
All right, thank you. So there are other comments. We, the older generation, want to pass on examples of history to the next generations. 21 Withrow is our piece of history. We have no intent to stop or hinder redevelopment. Just take a look at the intensification in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just ask if there's any. Well said. I think that having the comments that you had from various neighbors and that kind of history was added to the picture. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Gwyneth Davidson. Gwyneth, are you still here? Come forward, please. You as well have 5 minutes to chat. And who's on deck is David Clark, Nancy Wilson. Are David and Nancy here? Good, thank you. So thank you, Ms. Davidson.
Just 1 second, making sure it's off. Some have said that the claim of cultural heritage significance is romantically prejudicial. They say William Wilford Campbell, an early and significant Confederation poet, has little claim to a cultural designation because he only lived here for 3 years. These were the last 3 years of his life, when he wrote several significant poems. Poet Campbell was declared a person of national historic significance on the recommendation of the Historic Sites and Monument Boards of Canada in 1938. His grave and tombstone in Beechwood Cemetery was paid for by William Lyon Mackenzie King, a former Prime Minister. In addition, it has been said that heritage designation devalues private property. In fact, it can enhance the value of property, as has been shown in the past. There are recent properties that heritage status has given added value, not only to the property itself, but also increased the property values in the entire neighborhood in which they stand. Whether you call this home Kilmorey or Dr. Rogers' house, the fact is, this wonderful old stone building with its surrounding gardens has withstood the buffets of time for 175 years. Next year, In 2017, we will have been a country for only 150 years. Dr. Rogers' home deserves heritage status as an example of historical significance representing generations of growth, development, and hard work. In addition to its cultural and historic attributes, it has significant architectural features of the era which also claim to heritage status. The current owners have only recently said they wish to see the house preserved. Why then does the MLS listing of this property not show a picture of the stone house? The listing only shows the land as a development opportunity of 14 lots, which include the stone house as a development lot. I submitted a paper that I found with a reference on the web claiming that this old stone wall that encloses this property is original to the property, and I have submitted that. This property represents the original settlers of this region. In view of the fact that the Merivale area is planned to double in density in the very near future and is slated to become the heart and center of Midtown Ottawa, we cannot afford to lose this most valuable historic oasis. This property represents the culture of our region's early, hard-working settlers. It represents our heritage and is a precious landmark in the old police village of Cityview. This city was built by industrious, forward-looking people. We feel it is imperative to preserve this tiny remaining portion of their hard work and our early origins. We urge you to have the foresight to designate the remaining building and land that has always been a part of the home as heritage property. You will have no regrets if you choose to preserve this house. This is our last opportunity to save 21 Withrow now and for future generations. We are each only here for but a brief time. I ask you, isn't it incumbent on us to leave something of what has been our founding past to those who come after us? It has been said, the best way to build Ottawa is to balance growth while maintaining a high quality of life. Help us, please, to preserve a piece of quality of past and future life in Cityview. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Any questions to delegations? Seeing none, thank you for coming out today. Next up, we have David Clark. Good morning, Mr. Clark. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm a resident of Cityview. I have been for 25 years. I live on Rita Avenue, which is the first street north of Withrow. And when I walk out in the mornings and I look down the street, I can see the house. And it always gives me a warm feeling to know that there's a bit of a heritage, there's a bit of a history in Cityview, and it's not just whatever. So I'm here to support the heritage designation. The stone house is an important heritage landmark. It predates Confederation for 25 years. It's a significant landmark in the earliest registered municipality of the police village of Cityview, and the stone residence has always been a landmark in our community, and there are precious few heritage buildings left in Eastern Ontario, let alone Nepean, let alone Cityview. The Cityview Community Association has addressed these problems in the past. So I have 2 reports that we found in an old filing cabinet in the Nepean Museum, and one was 1977 and one was 1979. So the heritage concerns of the people of Cityview has been around for some time. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I have a couple of highlights that I would like to read. So the first one is the Cityview Tomorrow, written in 1977. All Cityview heritage buildings should be included on the Heritage Register of the Province of Ontario to ensure their continued existence, and appropriate site areas to them keeping their character and importance. Ancillary buildings should also be
specified. So people knew, even then in 1977, what the future was going to hold. The description was that this stone house was built in 1952 by Archibald Scott, who with his brother John purchased the previously described property on Peter Street, which is a similar place. The home was owned briefly by the Canadian poet Wilfred Campbell, but for the last 3 years before his death in 1918, he gave it the name Kilmorey. This was after the ancestral home in Scotland of his cousin, John Campbell, who was the Duke of Argyll. The stone house is currently owned by Dr. and Mrs. Roger. This was written in 1977. And they also indicated 2 small frame houses at 1416 Withrow and other farm buildings which have since gone. In 1979, there was another report called City View Green, a request for additional improved park space, local facilities to nurture and aesthetically enhance the community. This was published and presented to the former city of Nepean. On page 3 of this report, it contains the residents' approach to the imaginative but realistic measures required to improve the neighborhood's visual and recreational standards. It is reflective of the love and pride they felt for their unique and historic community. Also, it talks about historic properties, both buildings and land features that permit people in the community to know more about and physically experience their heritage. City View contains a number of homes built before the turn of the century and which were considered for heritage registration. This is in 1979. In particular, the city must investigate long-term protection of the heritage home and property at 21 Withrow. Potential future uses could include the establishment of Nepean Archives Museum, or at least a very fine piece of open space in City View, which should be preserved for passive botanical parkland. This should prove to be a viable option, and the City View Community Association will consult with the City View Nepean Horticultural Society to elicit their views on the best use of this property. These 2 reports demonstrate our long-standing and ongoing commitment to preserve the historic character of 21 Withrow, and is important to our community. These reports originally requested a designation of outbuildings, but they're gone. We ask the city to support in preserving this important landmark. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions for the delegation? Seeing as there's none, thank you for coming in today. Our next speaker is Nancy Wilson.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Wilson. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, my name is Nancy Wilson. I was born and grew up in City View on Rossland Avenue, 1 block away from 21 Withrow. Today, as an adult, I live at 16 Withrow, just across from the Roger property. As a little girl in the 50s and early 60s, I used to walk with my friends over to the Rogers Woods to play. On our trek there, we would walk the wall, balancing as kids do, getting from one end to the other. It was a game. It was our pastime. Today I sit at my home and watch birds and other wildlife flip between the trees on the property at 21 Withrow and my feeders. What a delight when you think I live 1 block away from the busy Marrowell Road. That property at 21 Withrow is a landmark in our neighborhood, one that had been there before Canada began. It has an outstanding historical significance and is what is left of City View's beginnings. In Canada's north, an Inukshuk is considered a landmark, so an old, dry, stacked stone wall would definitely be a landmark here in our community. When looking at the recommendations for property designation at the former Oblates property at 175 Main Street, the trees were a big consideration when deciding whether to include the property with the building. So surely the old mature trees at 21 Withrow would also be included in this consideration. It should also be noted that the owner has started to clear these old trees from the property. A prominent poet once lived at 21 Withrow and wrote about his life at the property. He bought 5 and a bit acres of the stone house as his paradise to get away from his government job in the city. He called it Kilmorey, a property with its original stone wall as referred to in the Historical Society of Ottawa and by Jane Moore. It is a place he could enjoy the trees, his gardens, and bring up his family. He could relax and write his poetry, much of which was about the beauty and aesthetics of his property. William Campbell was friends with other famous national poets, Archibald Lampman and Duncan Campbell Scott, and part of a group of writers we now know are called the Confederate Poets. He was also a close friend of Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie and of Lord Grey of the Grey Cup fame. Unfortunately, Campbell died on New Year's morning in 1918, but he left behind a wealth of cultural heritage at his property on Marable Road. Eventually, in the early 50s, the property was bought by another prominent person, Dr. J. David Roger. He was a well-known physician in Ottawa area, and he lived in our community until his death last year. He and his wife brought up their family at 21 Withrow, and he cared for and loved the land and trees in his gardens. This was his home, and he walked the neighborhood talking to us with pride until the last year of his life. Dr. Roger also fought to protect land at Beechwood Cemetery. This property at 21 Withrow is a part of my childhood. As the woods we played in, the wall we scaled and walked along, the Halloweens we walked the long driveway up to the big stone house. It was a neighborhood ritual, one I eventually enjoyed with my own children and my grandchildren. As an adult, it continues to be part of my life. It is across the street from me. It is where Dr. Roger walked and chatted. It was something we pass every day. The beautiful property in the middle of our crazy world, seconds from busy Marable Road, is a sign of peace and tranquility right here in the middle of our hectic everyday life. It is a landmark. It is a part of the fabric of this community. If the beautiful historic stone house was designated heritage, that would be wonderful. But if the house stands alone without its land and makes the address unique, and this land is developed, what is it lost? One, it loses the address we love. 21 Withrow would no longer be. The house loses its identity. Number two, in the fall and winter, the house can be seen still facing the Marable Road on which it is originally built. True to its identity, and as the poet wrote in his Down the Marable Road, the house as it sits now can still see down the Marable Road, the original Marable farming corridor. Without the land and once developed, this would be lost also. Without the land, the trees, the gardens, and the beauty that William Campbell wrote so passionately about would be lost. The poet wrote about his love for the land. He bought it because of the land, and although parts of the property were severed off, the remaining grounds would be lost, as would Campbell's and Dr. Rogers' dream for the future. The feeling of peace, of continuity with our past, our cultural heritage, would also be lost forever. This continuity has crossed generations already, and the property that has been steadfast is a place where the people can establish their location. This property is a piece of my heritage, as it is for many people, and I ask you to carefully consider the house and the property for designation as we move forward. When I sit on my porch or look out of my window, I see a beautiful mature trees, the old stone stack country wall, and a little piece of tranquil country in our fast-paced world. This property and the house predates us all. It has always been there. Please don't take this landmark and its identity away from the beautiful house. Please leave us a little piece of the past. Please leave the trees, the beauty, and the open space in the house. Please leave what is under my sky constant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions for Ms. Wilson? Thank you for coming today, and I'd ask Anya Mihalovic to come forward. And I also want to ask you, Ms. Collins, I was on the Heritage Committee of Nepean prior to amalgamation. I'm just wondering, we didn't have a lot of heritage property. So why did this never rise to the list? Why was it never recognized as worthy in the Nepean Township and the Nepean, City of Nepean days? Don, oh, I forgot, Don, you were there too. Nepean, I know, but...
Thanks, Madam Chair. I wish Dana was here, as he was the member at the time, but I think, as you probably know, we had very limited resources, basically one staff member doing it part-time. We had a number of designations, but we did not get to all the potential properties. And actually it was listed in Nepean days as well, so there was interest even going pre-amalgamation days.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Anya Mihailovich. I live in City View and have a profound appreciation for stone homes. The stone home was built to last and will stand longer than any home built today. It is essential that we protect and designate 21 Withrow in its entirety as an estate with heritage designation. A stone farmhouse needs room to be. It was the intent when originally built, and to take away the land that remains would be taking away its identity. Its identity within our neighborhood would forever be lost. It would sit on a small parcel of land drowned out by the new proposed homes. At some point, the city must put value and importance to the few lucky heritage homes that still maintain land within the city. Why is densification given more value than historic preservation? Recently, City View has had over 50 homes built, typically on large lots severed in two. I'm not against densification, but I'm here to say that we must treat 21 Withrow with respect to its long history, our history. It represents so much more than just a large lot. 21 Withrow has just over 2 acres, but it also has many other features that form part of its identity and have made it a landmark in our community for a very long time. From the mature trees surrounding the property, its dry stacked stone fence along 2 sides, its estate-like presence, and the long winding laneway from the street surrounded by nature. These features are unique to the property and should be preserved. The city, over the last 100 years, with every permit and severance granted, has allowed this home to become what it is today, reduced to its current 2.02 acres. It was originally a very large dairy farm along the Maryville Road farming corridor. The original Scott's family farm could fit our entire City View community within its farm. Even the current orientation of the home to its surrounding was planned and approved by the city. As the farm was developed, a city was built around it. We are now left with what the city has allowed it to become. The irony is that these are the very reasons that the Heritage Group has not included the land with its recommendation for heritage designation. It would no longer resemble the original farm. The City of Ottawa should take responsibility for its past decisions and not hold them against a property that is truly worthy of designation. I recommend that the heritage designation be allocated to both the stone home and the entire grounds that remain. In my research, this property exhibits all the attributes required to be a landmark within our community and the City of Ottawa. If 21 Withrow gets designated heritage, it would become Ottawa's 7th oldest building on the entire designation list. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thanks very much for coming out today. And now we have Jill Pro. Is it Pro or Prot? Pro, that's right. And while you're coming forward, Jill, I just wanted to say, just in case, did anyone in the audience wear mitts today, potentially homemade mittens? There's a lovely pair in the ladies' washroom that I noticed sitting there. And oh, I thought they were yours. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead, Jill. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to add some of my comments. We're pleased that the Culmeria home is being considered for heritage designation. This original stone farmhouse is an old and rare building that predates our existing neighbourhood and represents an important piece of Canadian history. It's hard to believe that this early homestead was built over 176 years ago when Ottawa was still named Bytown. The community of City View is composed of about 1,400 homes. My family has lived here since 1980, and we've always been intrigued by this unique old stone house centrally located in our community. The gardens and house are mostly hidden from the road by an old stone wall and large evergreens, which makes the property even more intriguing. The surrounding land frames the house and helps to give it its stately appearance. I've never passed without looking up the stone-flanked laneway to try to get a glimpse of the property and house. It somehow magically transforms me to a different time and place. The existence of this homestead in our community helps to remind us of those early settlers and our heritage. It's a unique property and a sharp contrast to existing housing in our community today. It is the building and the natural elements that surround it collectively make it a true cultural heritage landscape. It gives us a sense of place. I've read that when Wilfred Campbell lived here, the estate was over 5 acres, and he worked on weekends and his days off to transform the rough grounds into gardens and landscaping. This property is integral to the cultural value of this house. Through Subdivision Plan 375, City View was divided into 25-foot lots set out in an early 20th century grid layout. The lots were slow to sell, but eventually the village of City View was made up of post-war suburban bungalows on 50 to 100-foot lots. Wide lots. Unfortunately, the area was designed without any thought to parkland or open space. This property is a good reminder of the past, before our community became an unplanned suburban area. This may well be the last opportunity to preserve some open space in our neighborhood. We believe that even the heritage protection of the stone house in the middle of a new subdivision, some 12 additional new homes, will do little to preserve this unique property. In fact, if the house is allowed to stand with a new development around it, much of its cultural heritage value and interest would be lost. According to the Ontario Government, designation of heritage properties is a way of publicly acknowledging a property's value to a community. Only if the entirety property is designated will this property add any real value to our community. Designation is also supposed to encourage good stewardship and conservation. Past severances have reduced this property down to 2 acres. What is left of the original natural land must be preserved and protected. Designation of the entire property will recognize the importance of the property to the local community and will encourage good stewardship and conservation. The heritage significance of this property is not unique to either the building or the property. That is what makes this particular site so special. This house and land are identified together. Only if the entire property is protected will there be any real benefit and enjoyment for present and future generations. Council must be satisfied that the property meets at least one of the criteria prescribed in the Ontario Heritage Act. This property certainly meets the criteria. A property has historical or associated value if it has association with a theme or activity that is significant to the community. This property has a direct association with the agricultural heritage of our area. It also has a direct association with Wilfred Campbell because he loved nature and his house and property. A property has historical or associated value if it is physically, functionally, or historically linked to its surroundings. This house is definitely visually and historically linked to its surroundings. This can be attested by many of today's submissions and the reaction of most people when you see this unique property. To have contextual value, the property can be a landmark. This property, with its stone wall, country lane, gardens, and mature trees, is a true landmark in the centre of our neighbourhood and has been for over 100 years. We understand that surrounding lands are often included when properties are given heritage status. We consider the designation of this property vital to our community to ensure that our heritage is preserved. Hopefully, this unique land and house may one day become public property for the benefit and enjoyment of everyone. Isn't that what heritage is all about? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well done, Jill. Anybody have any questions for Jill? No, thank you. So next up we have Jean Roger and Dave Roger. Did you want to, where are you? Did you want to come up together? This is it. Welcome.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. Madam Chair, Committee and Council, for the record, we, the owners of 21 Withrow, have always preferred that the building be kept in active use. Our main issue, as well as the explicit concern of our father, for whom we are executors and whose wishes we are obligated to uphold, was the expropriation of the value and the rights of private property owners. In that regard, we are accepting of the recommendation of heritage for the house itself. That's not the issue. However, we do feel the largest part of the historical value rests in the occupancy of its most recent and honorable, eminent owner of 65 years, physician Dr. J. David Roger, rather than the naming by an interim owner, albeit renowned, of 3 years. we do request the house be designated the Dr. J. David Roger House. Our dad was a loving advocate of Ottawa history, immensely happy in his home, and principally involved in the saving of Beechwood Cemetery and development as Canada's national cemetery. However, he was foremost a proponent of the rights of the individual and private property, and he was explicit to us in that regard, particularly having had property he considered unfairly expropriated by the then City of Nepean at Chalk River in Heart's Desire. We reject other conjecture on what Dr. Rogers' dream for the future was. Also, to clear points of misinformation that came up in this meeting and the Heritage Council meeting of April 14th, no trees have been taken down or will be taken down by us without a permit and arborist expertise. We have a scrapbook from the previous owners identifying the stone wall they were planning to build on two sides only of the property, with the west stone wall to begin in 1942, and a later photo of the then owner sitting atop it. Integrated gate posts were built electrified for lights, surely not an issue of the 1800s. As our dear father, we children strive to be good citizens. Last August, in good faith, we contacted Heritage Ottawa to see if there were any issues we needed to be concerned about before we contemplated putting the property up for sale. At that time, we were told the house itself was of interest, and Heritage Ottawa would like to see its continuing existence, but it was not designated and property development was possible, so we proceeded accordingly. By the way, we were never approached by the City View Association, Community Association. We have to admit we did resent a delegation of neighbors insensitively telling us what you must do while we were still grieving within a few days of the week of our father's death. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, did you want to speak at all?
Madam Chairman, yes. Our father was approached in the 70s by Heritage and said, no, I don't want anything to do with you. We know that for a fact. That he was approached, but he didn't want it.
And, you know, we hear that often, and now we have a separate Built Heritage subcommittee that Councillor Nussbaum chairs. We do hear that a lot.
I just want it on the record.
Very few people actually do want that, as it turns out, and therefore saying no is not reason enough not to designate.
I know that. I'm frustrated by people saying what our father wanted. We know our father better than they do.
And absolutely, I concur with that. So,
thank you.
But thank you for coming here. Does anyone have any questions? Question from Councillor Leeper for you.
Thanks. I'm supporting the recommendation as is. I won't be seeking the designation of the whole property, but that stone wall, I've heard a couple of different things as to when different elements of it may have been put in place. I understand that you're keeping the stones that are being taken down as that wall comes down.
The stone is still there.
No, I have been taking some stone, yes.
Okay.
That stone wall, though, we do have documentation of when it was built, and it was not built at the same time as the house.
Okay, so I've got a couple of different folks telling me a couple of different things, and I appreciate where you're coming from on that. But I think the community might appreciate if you kept some of that stone and you know, tried to integrate it into the house that is being kept, if there's some way to reuse it. But
there's tons and tons of stone.
But
it is crumbling, and that's part of the reason I wanted to take it down before somebody was climbing on it and got hurt.
Sure. Fair enough. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Just building on what Councillor Leeper said, if you were, and you mentioned land in Heart's Desire, so likely you know Barrhaven, and I don't know how recently you've been out to Stonebridge and watched how it has built. But the Monarch, and now Mattamy, they saved the stone, the natural stone, from that landscape and actually had built hedgerows which define the community. So if this goes through and you have the heritage designation on the home and you seek for other kind of development, what Councillor Leeper said would be very important. And you could integrate that with any possible, with your the next phase of what you're doing. Okay?
I think so, but who's paying for that?
you know what, you're the one selling the land, and we're not going to designate the stone. We're just saying that you have a story to tell. Your dad was proud of his place, and taking the stone down, there's nothing to harm you from hanging on to it. And if you are successful in developing the property around the home, if that's the way that committee and council go, then I'm just saying it's an added feature and it's a benefit.
Yes.
Okay?
Understood. It's not going to get thrown away for sure.
That's good.
I just, it's an added expense to us as the house is already. It's costing us quite a bit just to keep it up month to month.
It's an old home.
It's an old home, and I've been looking after it for the last 20 years. I know what it needs and what it doesn't need.
There's a story to tell.
Yes.
Does anyone want to comment here? Councillor Shirelli, do you want to say anything? And then we'll wrap that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just hang on a second. Do you have anything for the Rogers? No. So you could go back to your seat now. Thank you very much for coming up today. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a question raised earlier about why the property hadn't been designated in former Nepean. And as I mentioned at Heritage Committee, Nepean was nearly perfect, but one of its very few imperfections was its protection of its heritage.
Okay, I have to step in now because you know why.
Because you were on Heritage Committee.
No.
Okay.
No. Because we had seen failure in our eyes when they stole the bell.
Yes, that's true.
And the old city of Ottawa kept creeping up and expropriating parts of Nepean. Right? Until
the bell was recovered by the former mayor in the middle of the night, yes. But anyway, one of the few things Nepean was not good at was preserving its history, and because it was very focused on development, becoming a new community, and so a lot of our history didn't get protected because it disappeared quickly. Then I guess. So, yeah, and in the late 1980s, we were still not focused properly on it, and then I guess we made a special effort in the early 90s to try to do something to protect our history. Actually, in the late 80s, we commissioned the history book, the Nepean City Beyond, and we then focused more on history. And I think that created Jan Harder as the community representative on the Heritage Committee a little later. Was that in the 90s?
Our big one was Collins House.
Yes.
And we all know who owns that and who has spent money restoring it lovingly.
Yes, but
so let's get to today's application.
As we get to 2017, which
actually 2016.
But as we get to 2017 and we celebrate the 225th anniversary of Nepean as a surveyed municipality, the oldest surveyed municipality in Eastern Ontario, we have to look at what we have left that we could possibly protect from the heritage of Nepean. And there are very few properties left that we can designate that we can use to protect the history and heritage of the former city of Nepean and what is now part of the center-west of Nepean. The community, we've heard from the community at Heritage Committee and here about the value that this property has. I believe Councillor Harder spent a lot of her life living in City View.
On St. Clair at the corner of Bazzano.
So there's first-hand knowledge.
My sister still lives on Côte-de-Neige.
Oh, okay. So there's first-hand knowledge of that. It's important that we maintain at least some link to our past through our built heritage. And while it may not have been a huge priority in the 80s and earlier in the former Nepean, it is a priority now. And I'd like, if this designation is passed at this committee, I just want to remind people that although property owners tend to head into these things dreading a heritage designation, thinking they're going to lose value, once it happens, there are a number of property owners who look at it and try to make the most of it and actually do create a huge positive out of gaining a heritage designation. And I'm thinking of the property on Piety Way in Fallowfield, where people were opposed to the designation, and then within months of the designation being imposed, had turned that into an enormous positive for both the property and the property value. So the community of City View, which was a police village inside, ultimately inside the oldest surveyed municipality in Eastern Ontario, has very few opportunities to protect any kind of built heritage. This is about the only one that we can. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing you left out was the big fire in Bell's Corners, which took most of our old heritage buildings down. Who said Madam Chair? Yes, Councillor Blaine, and then we're going to go to a vote.
Thanks, and I would not normally raise this, but given that it's the foundation of the councillor's argument, in fact, the oldest surveyed municipality in Eastern Ontario was Cumberland, which was surveyed in 1789, 3 years before Nepean. So.
But thank you. Okay, so listen, thank you, everybody. Thank you for all of you that came out today. Do you want yeas and nays, or is this item carried? Carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Your and dissent? One dissent from Councillor Blais, because he's from Cumberland and all that. Thank you very much. I have to leave the meeting now, and Vice Chair Tierney is going to take over, so I thank you all that have come out today. And the next item is the designation of the synagogue.
All right. So we got Don and Ann here. Do we have any questions for staff before we go to the delegations? Great. Seeing as there's none, our first delegation, Marcus Letourneau. Bonjour. Just of note, we do have simultaneous translation as well. You're no stranger to this place. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you to the members of Planning Committee. As mentioned, my name is Mark Letourneau. I'm the principal of Letourneau Heritage Consulting, which is a heritage planning firm. I'm here with my associate, Chris Uchiyama. We are representing the owner of the property, the Ontario Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Before beginning, we wanted to state that we think that there may be a perception based on some of the media reports that the church is not supportive of heritage conservation. And we are not here to object to the proposed designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. We understand that owner's consent is not required, and we understand that designation may proceed regardless of the church and congregation's concerns. But we would be remiss if we didn't identify that both the church and the congregation do have some concerns about this process. And in particular, the church has concerns with the statement of cultural heritage value and interest that is before you today. Staff has been working with us to amend the language and attributes to reflect some of the concerns and to clarify some of the language. And we'd publicly like to thank staff and appreciate the work that they've done with us. However, there still are some outstanding issues that we would like the opportunity to discuss with staff. And in particular, the church is concerned that its history and relationship with the property as the caretakers for the past 2 decades is not reflected in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value and Interest. In a lot of the portrayals of this property, it's referred to as a former synagogue. It is a former synagogue, but it is also an active church. And since 1997, the congregation has ensured the continued survival of the building, from which they play an active role in the community. And this has been at the cost of several $100,000 in maintenance. Now, the community has requested in writing for a 6-month deferral, and we would ask that the committee seriously consider this request. The request for referral is not intended to delay the process, but is instead to ensure that the church's consultative decision-making process is allowed more time to consider and respond. This is being requested with an understanding that the church and the local congregation has recently taken a number of key steps to move this process forward, and would like more time to help the 500-person plus congregation balance growth, ongoing maintenance, and its ministerial program with the additional requirements of heritage designation. Within the past month, the church and the local congregation have taken a number of key initiatives to help this process. They have recently created a committee to spearhead the heritage designation education, information sharing, and decision-making process at the local level. They have retained our firm, which has been retained for only 3 weeks. We have discussed both with staff and raised the possibility at the Municipal Heritage Committee of preparing a heritage conservation plan for the building to balance heritage conservation best practices with the congregation's needs. And again, we have been engaged with a meaningful dialogue with city staff to further understand the process and understands concerns with the language currently included in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value and Interest, which is a process that, in our professional opinion, still needs to continue. The church recognized that this building has an important story to tell about Ottawa's Jewish community, whose history is underrepresented in Ottawa and in its built heritage inventory. However, we want to emphasize the importance of ensuring that this key story is not being considered while another underrepresented community's heritage, a community that wants to ensure its continued vitality and local engagement, is not recognized. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Any questions of the delegation? Seeing as there's none, thank you very much for your time. Maintenant, Madame Mélie Bermenon-Fleury, s'il vous plaît. Bonjour, Madame. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, membres du comité d'urbanisme, bonjour. Je m'appelle Mélaïna Beaubrun-Fleury et je suis une membre active de l'Église adventiste du 7e jour francophone d'Ottawa. Je vous remercie de nous accorder quelques minutes pour présenter les questions et requêtes de notre communauté avant de faire votre recommandation au Conseil de la Ville d'Ottawa par rapport à la désignation de notre édifice comme patrimoine culturel en vertu de la partie 4 de la loi du patrimoine de l'Ontario. Notre congrégation présentement est composée de plus de 500 membres actifs qui adorent chaque sabbat et qui participent aux diverses activités hebdomadaires de l'Église. En outre, nous avons des réunions hebdomadaires supplémentaires chaque dimanche et mercredi soir. Et depuis l'acquisition de notre édifice, notre congrégation a triplé. Notre communauté est en pleine croissance et nous avons des membres qui habitent dans multiples quartiers d'Ottawa, dont Vanier, Orléans, Kanata. Notre Église organise de multiples activités régulières pour notre communauté, telles que des rencontres pour les enfants, les jeunes, les formations pour les parents et les adultes. Nous avons des activités qui encadrent nos membres afin qu'ils puissent être de meilleurs citoyens. Nos portes sont ouvertes à la communauté et nos jeunes participent régulièrement au grand nettoyage d'Ottawa. Nous organisons des semaines de camps d'été gratuits pour les enfants de la collectivité et nous continuons à utiliser les talents de nos professionnels au profit de la région. Par ailleurs, notre mission est de démontrer l'amour de Dieu. Nous le faisons constamment en accueillant les nouveaux arrivants, les réfugiés et en les aidant à s'intégrer rapidement dans la collectivité. Depuis plus de 20 ans, nous sommes les propriétaires du 375 King-Édouard. Nous sommes fiers d'être la première église adventiste du 7e jour francophone d'Ottawa et de l'Ontario. Dans la région ottavienne, nous sommes la seule congrégation adventiste francophone qui est propriétaire et notre bâtiment est à la disposition de notre communauté francophone pour les rencontres et événements régionaux. Nous sommes d'excellents intendants et gérants de l'édifice et de la propriété. Nous comptons de l'être tout autant que nous sommes propriétaires. Nous avons investi de centaines de milliers de dollars pour faire la rénovation nécessaire et ainsi assurer la sécurité structurelle de l'édifice. Nous avons une équipe stable qui veille sur l'entretien du bâtiment et de la propriété en tout temps. Dans le rapport présenté par le sous-comité du patrimoine bâti, notre communauté n'est pas incluse et cela nous attriste car nous sommes propriétaires depuis presque 20 ans. Le titre même réfère à l'usage premier de l'édifice en tant qu'ancienne synagogue et passe outre de notre histoire dans cet édifice. Sans nous, cet édifice ne serait pas présentement. Elle serait en piètre état, sinon déjà démolie. Notre histoire dans cet immeuble est aussi importante que l'héritage juif du siècle dernier. Nous vous demandons aujourd'hui de nous accorder un délai de 6 mois afin de considérer la décision de désignation de notre édifice. Étant donné que notre congrégation a récemment appris votre intention, un sous-comité de gestion a été mis en place pour informer notre communauté et mieux comprendre les enjeux du processus de désignation et nos responsabilités face à un immeuble patrimonial. Ce sous-comité doit se rapporter non seulement au comité d'église élu, à la congrégation, mais aussi conférer avec la Fédération des églises adventistes du 7e jour de l'Ontario, qui détient les titres de l'édifice. Le processus décisionnel est multicouche au sein de notre Église et nous avons besoin de ce temps supplémentaire pour pouvoir vous présenter notre position officielle sur ce dossier. De plus, nous avons rencontré récemment la représentante de la ville, Madame Fitzpatrick.
30 secondes.
Merci. La semaine dernière pour comprendre les démarches. Nous voulons collaborer avec la ville, assurer les décisions sont prises pour le meilleur de notre édifice, de notre Église et surtout assurer que notre mission ne soit pas handicapée ou compromise par cette désignation, ni que ça apaise et aussi nous aimerions apaiser les craintes de notre congrégation. Nous serons heureux de faire partie du patrimoine d'Ottawa et de l'Ontario, car nous avons un impact dans la collectivité et nous voulons continuer à aller en avant avec notre mission de servir la communauté francophone de la Basse-Ville tout en prenant soin de notre propriété. Encore une fois, nous vous remercions à l'avance de l'attention que vous portez à notre demande et nous espérons recevoir une réponse favorable à notre requête.
C'est une belle présentation. Question, Conseil Couché.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Beaubrun-Fleury, merci de votre présentation. Pouvez-vous me dire comment, je reconnais que le patrimoine de l'édifice pour la communauté juive et je reconnais aussi que la contribution patrimoniale et culturelle de l'Église adventiste du 7e jour est en train d'être écrite dans cet édifice-là. Mais et je reconnais aussi les travaux exceptionnels, des activités importantes, nettoyage de la capitale, les camps d'été et tout, et je vous en remercie. Comment est-ce que cette désignation, que la décision de ce comité affecte ces activités-là de l'Église?
La crainte que nous avons en tant que communauté, et cette crainte doit être apaisée à travers les communications, le dialogue que nous allons avoir avec la ville. La crainte que nous avons, c'est que puisque nous sommes une congrégation croissante, que cette Église, par la désignation, en étant obligée de garder non seulement la façade, mais les deux côtés du bâtiment, va nous empêcher de même pouvoir agrandir notre Église lorsque ce sera nécessaire. De plus, il y a déjà une partie du bâtiment qui doit être rénovée. Juste pour nous, donc nous ne voulons pas que cette désignation mette un fardeau financier trop lourd sur la congrégation qui doit entretenir ce bâtiment. De plus, si nous dépensons l'argent sur l'entretien du bâtiment, en nous assurant que tout reste intact selon les critères de la désignation. Cet argent supplémentaire, c'est un argent que nous n'allons pas investir dans la communauté, dans la collectivité.
Merci. Autre question pour la délégation? Non? Merci, madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Next speaker, Ulaj Lotamba. And forgive me if I mispronounced your name.
Hello, bonjour. Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Ulaj Lotamba. Je suis ingénieur professionnel et membre de l'Ordre des ingénieurs du Québec. Je fréquente cette église adventiste francophone d'Ottawa depuis 2006 et j'ai travaillé plus de 5 ans dans la direction des jeunesses. Je dois remercier Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité d'urbanisme de nous donner cette occasion de nous exprimer en quelques minutes. Je viens faire mon intervention en tant que membre actif de cette Église et professionnel bénévole pour ma communauté. Lorsque j'ai appris la nouvelle de désignation de cette Église comme patrimoine, les membres de la communauté et moi avons pris un peu de temps pour comprendre l'impact de cette désignation et le comparer à la réalisation de nos projets futurs. Depuis plus de 3 ans, vu l'augmentation de nos membres, un manque d'espace a été constaté pour les cultes de sabbat matin et pour plusieurs rencontres hebdomadaires des différents départements. Dans le but d'accommoder les membres et de maintenir nos activités, une équipe a été mise sur pied pour évaluer trois alternatives suivantes: la maintenance ou la rénovation de l'édifice, la vente du bâtiment, la démolition ou la reconstruction d'une nouvelle structure. L'équipe est arrivée à la conclusion de maintenir la reconstruction complète pour accommoder notre communauté francophone active dans ces bâtiments d'environ 20 ans, car déjà les places et les bureaux sont insuffisants et des fois, certaines rencontres ont lieu soit en plein air ou dans les maisons privées. Brièvement, je vais aborder sur les plans structurels, financiers et environnemental. Sur le plan technique ou structural, quoique la fondation de ces bâtiments est en pierre calcaire, aucun document ne nous permet d'ajouter des charges additionnelles en plus des charges de conception sans avoir renforcé la fondation. Aussi, nous pouvons confirmer que la capacité portante du sol pourrait résister aux charges supplémentaires. Sur le plan financier, selon l'expérience, maintenir les façades tout en ajoutant de nouvelles charges ou comme étage ou insérer les stationnements dans les sous-sols en maintenant les façades coûterait plus que les doubles aux contribuables. Sur le plan environnemental, en tant que bons citoyens de la ville, nous aimerions, en cas de rénovation ou de reconstruction, respecter toutes les normes environnementales en vigueur. Or, vu la localisation, on est au centre-ville, intersection King Edward et Rideau,
Quoique une étude de faisabilité environnementale approfondie serait nécessaire, nous pouvons déjà clairement voir que les contraintes environnementales seront des tailles pour maintenir la face avant du bâtiment. J'en profite de demander à la ville un délai raisonnable pour qu'ensemble nous puissions avoir le temps de faire et évaluer ce bâtiment à un expert externe. Mon devoir en tant que citoyen consiste aussi à protéger le patrimoine. Nous n'aurions pas de problème à maintenir les devants et les façades si les conditions structurelles et environnementales du bâtiment les permettraient et si les coûts associés seraient raisonnables et acceptables pour les contribuables. En tant que citoyen et professionnel, je demanderai à la ville d'Ottawa de considérer ces aspects car nous courons les risques de non seulement perdre une communauté de bons citoyens en expansion, mais aussi de disperser ces noyaux actifs en tout temps au cœur de la ville d'Ottawa. Je vous remercie.
Merci, monsieur. Une question pour la délégation? No? Merci, monsieur. The next speaker up, c'est Madame Marie-Hélène Ménard. Bonjour, madame.
Bonjour.
Vous avez 5 minutes.
Merci. Donc, bonjour, Monsieur le Président et chers membres du Conseil. Mon nom, c'est Marie-Hélène Ménard et je suis un des dirigeants de la Société de jeunesse de l'Église francophone d'Ottawa. Je vous remercie de l'opportunité que j'ai de parler au nom de mon Église, ma communauté. Je me présente aujourd'hui devant vous en tant que membre de cette communauté francophone depuis 2002. Juste avant que je mentionne la raison de ma présence devant cette assemblée, souffrez que je partage avec vous quelques faits importants par rapport à l'implication de mon Église, ma famille d'accueil dans la communauté. Oui, je dis famille car par sa vocation, l'Église francophone d'Ottawa ouvre toutes grandes ses portes à ces centaines d'immigrants adventistes et francophones en provenance d'Haïti et de notre alma mater, l'Afrique. Ceci dit, depuis que notre communauté a fait l'acquisition de cette bâtisse près de 2 décennies de cela, notre société de jeunesse composée de jeunes de 4 à 35 ans et aussi de plusieurs jeunes de cœur travaille d'arrache-pied en vue de les outiller adéquatement selon nos croyances et nos valeurs chrétiennes. Ces jeunes deviennent des citoyens accomplis dans leur société immédiate. Parmi les activités réalisées, je peux citer les camps d'été à la manière des scouts, les excursions en plein air, le service communautaire. Chaque année, nous prenons part au grand nettoyage de la ville avec nos jeunes et les prestations dans les foyers pour les personnes âgées et préparation et distribution de paniers de Noël. Nos jeunes adultes participent aussi en tant que bénévoles dans les banques alimentaires. En plus d'être un lieu de culte le mercredi soir et le sabbat matin, le 375 Kinédois accueille les jeunes chaque dimanche où ces derniers reçoivent instructions sur les notions de savoir-vivre, les travaux manuels, de l'aide avec leurs travaux scolaires, entre autres. Donc notre société de jeunesse s'est tellement accrue durant ces dernières années que notre Église envisage d'agrandir la bâtisse en vue de mieux de servir sa communauté. D'où ma présence ici pour vous faire connaître mes appréhensions par rapport à la désignation de la bâtisse comme patrimoine. Qu'en sera-t-il de nos projets et par ricochet des activités dans la communauté? En tant que résidente d'Ottawa, ne pensez pas que je m'oppose à cette noble entreprise. Au contraire, j'encourage vos efforts dans la sauvegarde de notre culture, de notre histoire pour les générations futures. Cependant, je crains qu'une fois l'édifice est désigné patrimoine et considérant toutes les restrictions relatives, nous ne soyons en mesure d'exécuter nos plans ci-dessus mentionnés et continuer à œuvrer dans cette communauté. Donc, je vous remercie pour votre écoute et aussi de votre considération par rapport à nos appréhensions. Merci.
Merci, madame. Question pour la délégation? Non? Merci, mademoiselle.
Merci.
Next up, we have Jose Muga. Jose? Bonjour, monsieur.
Bonjour, monsieur. Juste quelques secondes afin de trouver les petits mots que je voudrais dire. Mais en attendant, je tiens à vous saluer chacun et vous remercier pour votre regard que vous portez sur cette ville en voulant sauvegarder la beauté de cette ville. Et je suis arrivé ici il y a déjà 20 ans, et depuis 20 ans, j'habite au Canada avec ma famille. Nous n'avons jamais été autre part autant que nous aimons cette ville, et nous avons apprécié vraiment la beauté, la quiétude, la propreté de cette ville. Et c'est ce que mon Église entreprend aussi dans cette ville, de vouloir garder la beauté, la propreté et la paix qui règne dans cette ville. Nous sommes plus que 500 membres, et 500 membres qui travaillent d'arrache-pied pour que la vie soit belle ici à Ottawa, dans la région d'Ottawa. Nous sommes un peu plus que 250 jeunes qui sont indiqués pour qu'ils aillent à l'école, pour qu'ils ne fréquentent pas des endroits mal famés, pour qu'ils ne tombent pas dans la drogue, pour qu'ils ne volent pas, pour qu'ils ne violent pas. Nous avons un travail d'encadrement à faire avec nos jeunes, et c'est ce que nous avons fait depuis près de 20 ans. Donc, pour nous, notre histoire s'inscrit déjà dans la beauté de cette ville, dans le devenir aussi de cette ville. Je vous remercie de ce que vous regardez ce que c'est la beauté et le futur de cette ville. Et nous aussi, nous regardons du même côté. Et nous regardons aussi vers la bonté. Comment maintenir cette ville pour que les gens qui arrivent de tout part, que ce soit d'Afrique, de l'Amérique latine, de l'Europe, qu'ils se sentent à l'aise ici, comme nous autres Canadiens, nous nous sentons à l'aise ici à Ottawa. Donc, de ce fait, nous avons une demande. Et moi, j'en ai deux en particulier. Premièrement, comme une communauté francophone, nous aimerions recevoir nos courriers en français autant que possible. Et nous aimerions aussi vous dire de nous donner un délai afin de parler aux membres, afin que tout le monde soit prêt à embrasser la même cause, n'est-ce pas? Donc, je vous dis merci, et je dis merci aussi à la communauté juive qui a commencé cette belle histoire que nous avons pris au cours de route et que nous voulons l'acheminer avec beauté, avec beaucoup d'appréciation pour que les gens de la ville, comme vous et moi, et quand nous nous promenons, nous nous sentons en paix, nous nous sentons aimés, nous nous sentons appréciés. Merci pour votre écoute.
Merci, monsieur. Question pour les délégations? Pas de questions? Merci, monsieur. Les délégations finales, Michel Lefebvre. Bonjour, madame.
Bonjour, je remercie la chaire pour l'opportunité de parler. Oui. Donc, mon nom, c'est Michel Lafleur et je fréquente cette communauté religieuse depuis même avant l'acquisition de ce bâtiment. Il y a plusieurs personnes qui ont lutté pour qu'on puisse avoir ce lieu d'adoration. J'étais alors qu'une enfant, mais c'est gravé dans notre histoire à nous et que c'est un privilège et un honneur pour nous de pouvoir prêter une des valeurs qui était importante à la synagogue, qui est l'observation du sabbat. C'est là que j'ai grandi, à part d'avoir grandi dans un foyer qui m'a inculqué des valeurs, mais la communauté religieuse aussi a grandement contribué. Et c'est dans cette communauté que j'ai reçu mon conseil pour m'aider dans mon choix de carrière. Donc c'est là que j'ai passé la majorité de mon temps, surtout au centre-ville, où on parle de l'église, de l'école secondaire que j'ai fréquentée, de la salle, ainsi que l'Université d'Ottawa. Donc tout ça, c'est au centre-ville. Et aujourd'hui, j'achève mes études à l'Université d'Ottawa, en bac disciplinaire en lettres françaises d'éducation. mais aussi une mineure en histoire. Donc j'ai suivi des cours sur les Juifs, entre autres l'histoire des Juifs au Canada, et c'est un peuple que j'aime beaucoup, d'où la raison, je trouve que c'est normal que la Ville veuille souligner l'apport de cette communauté en désignant cette synagogue, mais je n'aimerais pas qu'on nous oublie dans le portrait aussi. Donc disons que ce qui m'a porté à réfléchir, c'est que qui sait ce qui serait arrivé à ce bâtiment si nous ne l'avions pas acheté. Donc j'ai été témoin des rénovations et je peux même dire qu'en tant qu'enfant, à l'époque, on a été une des causes qui a encouragé cette rénovation-là, cet agrandissement. Donc, aller voir pour les besoins de la jeunesse actuelle plus tard. J'étais aussi témoin des augmentations des fréquentations. Et toujours concerné par le patrimoine, en 2012, on m'a octroyé cette bourse et un prix de jeunesse sur la conservation du patrimoine ontarien, donc je me sens concernée. Et je sais que dans la congrégation active et grandissante dans laquelle je suis, nous avons des projets d'avenir qui peuvent se voir alourdis par les régulations en matière de propriété. Donc, j'ai un peu pensé à l'impact que ça pourrait avoir à long terme sur l'avenir de notre communauté, surtout les jeunes qui militent là-dedans. Et maintenant que je suis en charge de la société de jeunesse de cette Église, on aura éventuellement besoin de plus d'espace à l'avenir. Donc, des énormes investissements qui vont être versés pour garder les spécifications physiques du bâtiment peuvent priver la jeunesse de la communauté religieuse de fonds qu'elle pourrait réinvestir au sein de la communauté. Donc, disons que je pense que l'Église adventiste francophone reflète bien l'esprit du patrimoine dans le quartier où elle se trouve. Donc, on parle d'une communauté francophone qui se distingue depuis presque 20 ans, qui contribue à l'éducation des jeunes et prône des valeurs saines, et j'en passe. Donc, permettant ainsi que l'esprit du patrimoine soit perpétué, on aurait voulu avoir une plus grande flexibilité par rapport à l'avenir physique de cet édifice. Et malgré mon attachement affectif, on prône le patrimoine ontarien, mais on pense aussi à notre jeunesse florissante qui a des besoins valables en matière d'infrastructure qu'on devrait être en mesure de combler. Donc, je vous remercie pour votre écoute.
Bien, merci. Question pour la délégation? Non? Merci, madame. So at this point, I'll ask committee if you have any further questions to staff. Seeing as there's none, I'm going to ask staff to quickly comment on what they've heard today. I think there's a few different items that we've heard some impassioned speeches today. I don't know how much they directly relate to the heritage aspect of things, but if they can briefly, and it doesn't have to go on for, hours, give us an overview of what you've heard today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we heard today concern about the ability of the building to adapt to a growing, vibrant congregation, and I think that what we can say there is that there is a process to add to the building. There is room to the rear. We frequently work with schools, for example, Muchmore School that expanded. We worked with the community to build a much larger school through an addition to that building. So additions to institutional religious buildings are something that we frequently work with property owners, and I'm sure that we could work out a way that the congregation could meet its growing needs and add to the building while respecting its cultural heritage value. And we would certainly look forward to embarking on a project like that. The question of the long-term the addition or the recognizing the 20 years of the congregation in the building, in the history of the building, that's not an enormous amount of time, but certainly between now and council we could probably write a sentence that would be added to the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value, acknowledging that the role that the community has played in the last 20 years since their acquisition.
Thank you for that, and I've just noticed Councillor Brockington has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just receive clarification on the timelines and specifically when the current owners and occupants of the building were informed of the application? I realize this went to the Built Heritage Subcommittee 6 weeks ago, but how much advance notice did they get before that hearing to, as a congregation, prepare? We heard this morning that there's some concern about a request for more time for a deferral, but I want to know what's the process here.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, the first time that we contacted the congregation was in May of 2015. We sent a letter to the pastor just indicating that we were interested in designating the building and outlined the process. I subsequently spoke with the pastor and they requested a delay. So the next time we spoke with them was in January of 2016. We sent another letter. In February, we sent a letter to Mr. Bertie Chan, the Director of Property and Risk Management for the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Canada. They asked that we delay from going to the March Built Heritage Subcommittee to the April Built Heritage Subcommittee, and then that brings us to today. And then I subsequently just met with members of the congregation, some who presented today last week.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, I just want to say thank you for all the hard work on this. I think there's been a lot of due diligence on this file. I want to thank Councillor Nussbaum as well, and I believe he also has a technical amendment that he'd like to move along with this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I've got a technical amendment to move forward. Whereas, I'll just read the operative whereas paragraph. Whereas Document 5, which is the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value, requires minor technical amendments, including a change to one of the terms to be consistent with the Ontario Heritage Act, clarification of the height of the building, identification of the previous uses of the building, and the contextual value of the building, and to correct a minor error in the wording of the last heritage attribute. Therefore, be it resolved that Document 5 be replaced with the attached Statement of Cultural Heritage Value. The attached Document 5 addresses those issues which I mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you, Councillor. So on this item, is that carried as amended?
The item is amended.
Carried. Carried? And the amendments? Carried. Great, thank you very much for that. We'll move along to the next item on the agenda. Item number 8, make sure these are the same. Application for demolition. Is this one right here? Yeah. All right, moving right along, we're down to item number 14. This is a motion where notice was previously given. I believe this is Councillor Leeper. Demolition of the existing residential dwelling at 129 Smearl Avenue. We have no presentations on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, this is a motion to demolish an existing residential building on Smearl Avenue. Normally, a demolition permit isn't extended until a building permit is. This is a building that was damaged by fire. It is sitting unoccupied on Smearl. It is uninsurable by the owner. They have reached out to ask for a little bit of wiggle room with respect to getting that the plans in and the building permit of a few months. I've spoken with staff, with the community association, and with the owners. It'll be owner occupied. Rather than go through all of the whereases, I'm just going to move that. Sorry. Therefore, be it resolved that in order to expedite removal of the hazard, Planning Committee recommend Council approve the demolition of the existing building prior to the issuance of a building permit. Be it further resolved that Council's decision be subject to the following. The owner shall demolish the entirety of building and remove it from the property. If a building permit is not issued within 60 days of the building demolition, the owner shall level and landscape the property, implementing city-approved best practices not to damage or injure the tree with grass and a fence to prevent parking to the satisfaction of the General Manager of Planning and Growth Management. And C, the registered owner shall prohibit any interim use on the property until a new building is constructed and maintain the property in accordance with the property standards bylaw. So the conditions have been put on there in response to the community who want to ensure that it doesn't become an eyesore if it takes more than a few months to get built.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Do we have any questions for Councillor or staff? Seeing as there are none on this item, is it carried? Carried. Great. Thank you. Any notices of motion? Seeing as there's none. Inquiries? Other business? And our next meeting will be May 10th, 2016 on adjournment. Is that carried? Thank you very much.
Jen,